and I have grandchildren and I have the life that I always dreamed of. And she said, I
Wow.
just wanted to thank you because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have that. And it was such a special phone call and reminded me of why I do this work. So now you have the opportunity to craft the future you want with what you're interested in. And do you want to live? Where do you want a vacation? How do you want to plan your retirement? You can focus more on yourself. So it can be very positive.
Good morning or afternoon, whatever time zone you happen to be in today. This is John Checky, co-founder of Checky Financial, along with JJ, and we have the delightful opportunity to interview Daryl Weinman, who is an expert family lawyer, and she's launching a website, which is going to have lots of helpful hints for you. And why don't you tell us about your amazing website?
So I launched a new website. It's called exhale.com and it's ex-hale.com. I came up with the idea because I've been a family law attorney for 32 years, and every client who comes in to meet with me is terrified. They're all scared of what their future might look like. And so we spend most of the time talking about managing their fears. I go through with them, what are all the assets and debts that you have? What is your ability to earn income? What does your spouse make? What kind of
Mhm.
support can you expect to get? And, I kind of build a quick little spreadsheet for them while they're sitting there, kind of do some quick calculations and give them a pretty good idea of this is what you can expect to have at the end of the case, your community and separate property, and this is what you'll make. And then it's definitely less than what you have now, but you're going to be okay. You're not going to be homeless. You're going to survive. You're going to be okay. And it calms their fears.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden they can think straight. They can move forward. And so I created a website that does that for them. So people who are sitting at home thinking about divorce, scared that if they were to go down that road, they're going to be penniless. They're not going to be able to survive. They can use this website. They can try it out for free, but if they decide to use the full site, it's only $75 for a 6-month subscription. They can go in, update numbers anytime they want to. It's an interactive worksheet. They can move numbers back and forth, and it's full of information that'll answer all their questions. And so this way they can decide at home without having to
Mhm.
pay, thousands to an attorney that I'm ready to do this. And now at this stage, there's so many people doing their own divorces. They are, I think 70% of people are doing their own divorces now. And so they can download forms, they can access AI, but this is the only site that I know of where they can figure out what to put on those forms. How are they going to divide the property and the debts, and what can they expect to get out of child support, spousal support. And then I have videos and all kinds of, frequently asked questions and tons of 32 years worth of information that I've learned along the way to, questions I've received from clients. Should I keep the house? If I don't keep the house, what are my other options and so on? So that's what the site is for.
How on earth does a do it yourself divorce work?
Well, there are lots of form sites out there now, so people can download their own forms. I'm in Austin in Travis County, Texas. We have the Travis County Law Library, which is fairly unique, but they have forms, and you can actually, I think, anywhere, and they're Texas forms, so anywhere in Texas, use those forms, just download them, and they fill out their forms, they file them themselves. There's kind of a step-by-step guide as to what to do with these forms, but there's nowhere that tells you what to put on the forms, how to divide your community and separate property. And what does that even mean? What is my separate
Right.
property? How do I define that? What if the marriage has only been 2 years? What if it's been 20 years? All the different factors.
That to me sounds like a nightmare on the installment plan. It's like jumping into quicksand and hoping for a miracle. So, in terms of your 32 years of experience, which you're trying to help people kind of map through, why don't you tell us a fun story or two about a successful divorce and a holy guacamole nightmare divorce?
Well, I have to say, successful divorce is kind of an oxymoron. In fact, I was thinking about a case that I did years ago. This is back in about 2004. I represented a guy who he and his wife both worked for the same company. She was in sales, he was in tech. She traveled a lot. And so he was kind of the primary parent of their 6-year-old,
Mhm.
and found out that while she was off traveling doing sales, she was also sleeping with a lot of her clients. So they go through this divorce, and he decided, if I'm going to be primary parent, I'm going to need the help of my parents, and I would like to move back to Colorado. So it turned into a big
Mhm.
case. In Texas, we can do jury trials. It went to a jury trial, and we won everything we could possibly win. He got primary custody. He was allowed to move back to Colorado. She was paying him child support. It was like an 80-20 split of assets. Like anything we could have asked for from the court, we got. And when we were leaving, he was sad. And I said to him, "Why are you sad? We got everything." And he said, "But I didn't get everything because I used to have 100% of the time with my son. I used to come home every single night and he was there. And now I will only have him, whatever, 2/3, 3/4 of the time.
Mhm.
And on the time that I'm not with him and he's, with her and her new boyfriend, and I don't know what he's doing. I'm not part of it." And so ultimately he felt like he lost. And that was
Mhm.
really eye opening for me. So that I've kind of used that going forward to remind people that ultimately they wanted to stay married. They wanted their marriage to work
Mhm.
out. They wanted to be happy. And that's never going to happen in a divorce case. So even when we're very successful in the divorce arena, it's still sad.
So that kind of lends itself to the idea that it's not all about money. There's a lot of emotion involved when you're
Oh, yeah.
dividing up a family.
For sure. All of my clients are very emotional, not just because of the fear, but because, and usually, I mean, almost always people aren't making a snap decision to get divorced. It has built up over time, over time, over time. And by the time they get to the decision for divorce, they're ready to be just done. They
Mhm.
don't want to start a whole new year-long or longer process of getting divorced. But that is the system that
Mhm.
we have. And so it is frustrating. It is scary. They don't know how to plan. They don't know what their budget's going to be. So are they going to stay in this house? Are they going to stay in this neighborhood? Can their kids stay in the same school? How far am I going to be able to live from my
Mhm.
parents? I need support. Like there's so many moving parts and so many
Mhm.
questions. And it's a really tough time.
And how
So I
does your website kind of help people map that out?
Well, if they want to be able to stay in the house and stay in the neighborhood, they need to know what their budget is.
Mhm.
And, what is the likelihood they're going to be awarded the house? If they have to buy out the other person's
Mhm.
portion, how can they do that? What are their options? And so on the site, there's, buttons that say, what are my options? And they can look and they can see, well, I can give them an OLTI lien. Well, what's an OLTI lien? And then, it explains that. Or I can take out a HELOC. Well, what is that? How do I qualify? And will I qualify? And then, of course, there's the budget and figuring out how much they're going to either pay or receive in support. And they can also kind of look at it and go, you know what? Maybe now is not the right time. Maybe I need to go back to school or get an additional certification or join some networking groups and build my career before I decide, okay, I'm ready to take this on and be single. So it gives them the tools to plan their future.
How fun. And how did you happen to be lucky enough to put together this website after 32 short, glorious years in practice?
Well, I felt like I was answering the same questions from
Mhm.
these people. And I also noticed this trend toward people doing their own divorces, which means that they are sitting at home trying to figure this out. And it's not easy. People think it's so easy. Oh, well, we write down everything we have and we split everything in half and we're just done. But it's not that easy. And especially when you've got people who have a lot of separate property that they owned prior to marriage, inheritance, gifts they've received from their parents. And how does that all factor in? And so there's auto calculations within the website. They can say,
Mhm.
well, wait a minute, I put down, a $50,000 inheritance as the down payment in this house. I want to make sure I not only get that back, but I get back the increase in value
Mhm.
to my investment. And so the website calculates all that for them to show them this is what your separate property portion of the house is. And then this is the portion that gets divided.
As a certified public accountant for 50 years, I know what the difference between separate property and community property is. But just for fun, why don't you tell our audience what you mean by those terms?
So separate property is anything that you owned prior to marriage, anything that you received during the marriage as gift or inheritance. You need to be able to trace that along the way. So like if you've been married for 10, 20 years, but you owned this house prior to marriage, well, the house itself is separate property, but all of the community income that you invested in the
Mhm.
house is community property. So when you look at what, the equity in the house, it's a, $500,000 house, we owe 200,000. Well, what part of that 300,000 is separate and what is community?
Mhm.
And so once you answer the questions, and I have it set up like step by step, similar to TurboTax, where it asks you step by step all the questions and then it does the calculations for you.
The interesting thing that you pointed out is the do-it-yourselfers is very similar in our industry. People that's, oh, it's so easy, financial planning. I just do this, couple steps, look up some information, I'm good to go. Some people stay that route. Other people, as you explained to us, a different conversation is they see the level of expertise that you bring and assistance, peace of mind with knowing your numbers to be able to go to ask you for your help to actually walk through the process instead of continue to do it themselves. So, with that, what is a misunderstanding about your profession that people have?
Well, people love to come to me and say, well, it's real easy to divide all our stuff. I just want what's fair. Well, if the two of you could agree on what is fair, you probably would stay married. What is the definition of fair? It's very subjective. And so they can't agree on what is fair. That's why, I've had guys who'll come in, who'll say, I worked through this marriage and I earned all of this retirement. She sat on the couch and ate bonbons raising 6 kids, but she was sitting on the couch. And so she shouldn't get any of my retirement. And of course, she's saying, well, I sacrificed my career. I stayed at home and took care of the family. And we were building this nest egg together. Of course, I should get half. Well, the law actually says how that gets divided. And so
Mhm,
I'm not saying they need to hire an attorney, but they do need the legal knowledge to
mhm,
know what the law says is fair because
mhm,
they're
Sounds to
not
me
going to
like
agree.
you kind of sort of add perspective since you're not emotionally involved in most cases when it comes to this. And therefore, you could, if not provide peace of mind, at least a path toward, oh, by the way, this is how this actually works, as opposed to how you think it works.
Right. Right. And that's why when people hire attorneys, they hire attorneys because we are not emotionally involved.
mhm,
I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm just telling you that if we end up in front of a judge, this is what the judge is going to do. They're just going to take out the law books and they're going to apply the law. And this is how things are going to get divided. And so since you're hoping never to have to go in front of a judge, you just need to know what's in those law books and what
mhm.
is fair as according to the law.
Same is true with investments. My darling wife, Susie, who's a professional singer, she still gets mistaken for Marilyn Monroe, even though Marilyn Monroe, if she was 74, might be lucky enough to look like Susie. But she watches various shows on TV that talk about stocks and investment. And so when someone does that, I say, what you're going to do today is watch that stock kind of get a bump up in publicity in terms of its price. Then you kind of have to go back and see how that's gone for a number of years and then see if that actually makes sense to you, not only now emotionally, but long term. Because the last time I looked, when you're making an investment, JJ, why on earth would anybody make an investment?
It's for the long-term growth, not for a day's growth. So it's something you're actually wanting to provide for your lifestyle and what you enjoy doing, not simply just to have more money in your account.
Right, right. And, some of the other things that they can look at because this is all interactive,
Mhm,
they enter all their information in, but then they can move things around. And so, for example, if there's a closely held business, somebody has their
mhm,
own business, they have their own plumbing business or roofing or financial planning, that business has a value too. And
mhm.
information in the site too on how to value your business to put on the spreadsheet. And if you have to buy the other person out of the business, that could be a big number. And that's not liquid. It's not like you can say, okay, well, we'll just sell the house and you can have half the money. They're going to keep the business, obviously. So they have to buy them out and they can do it with, well, you'll just keep more of the retirement, or maybe we don't have enough in the retirement. So maybe I'll just pay you out monthly. Maybe I'll do it in spousal support payments. So even though the law says you only have to pay 1,000 a month in spousal support, I'm going to pay you out over time. And that gives the stay at home mom who's trying to rebuild her career monthly payments. Like there's a lot of different ways to look at it and you can get really creative to make sure that everybody's going to be okay.
So after you finished up with law school, why on earth did you become a family law practitioner?
So I actually started my career on Wall Street in New York. I worked for JP Morgan. When I was finishing college, I thought maybe I want to go to law school. It sounded interesting. And so I took the LSATs. I I started applying and I thought, this is very expensive and a lot of time, and I'm not really sure I want to do that. So I decided not to go to law school. I applied for a job, got this job with JP Morgan. I was working in their corporate headquarters, and it was in mergers and acquisitions. It was so interesting to me. And I thought, you know what? Everybody above me has a higher degree. They either have an MBA or a JD. I need to have another degree. And I wanted to go to law school at one point. So I decided to use my LSATs, and I went to law school. And conveniently for me, there was a New York Law School, which I could walk to from Wall Street, and they had a night program. So I went to law school at night, and I was working 60 to 80-hour weeks and going to law school at night, and thought, this is really hard. And I'm not really sure I like this lifestyle. And I think that if I stay here on Wall Street, I am going to continue the same kind of hours. And I wanted to have children and I wanted to have a life. So
Mhm.
I decided, when I finish law school, I think I'm going to move away from corporate and banking and New York City. And I found Austin, Texas. I loved it. I decided to do my last semester of law school here. And I stayed and raised my children here and decided I want to work on, rather than working on these giant mergers and acquisitions projects where I knew the tiniest little piece of the project and not even the whole project, I wanted to help people one-on-one. And so I started doing family law and criminal defense in the beginning. And after about 6 years, they're in two different buildings in Austin, I couldn't manage both. And so I dropped off the criminal defense and stuck with family law, became board certified, and just continued down that same path. And it's difficult. I'm dealing with very emotional people every day. Even if they're really nice people, they are at their worst. And some of them are not really nice people at their worst. So it's not easy, but it is rewarding to, I try to look at this like a full service law firm. I'm not just going to do your paperwork, but I'm going to help you plan for your future.
Mhm.
Figure out not just, okay, now you're divorced and here's a lump sum settlement, but get them with great people like financial planners and CPAs, mortgage lenders and realtors and mental health professionals and everybody else who can help them actually plan out where do they go next. And so I think that the website kind of helps with that too. I'm a planner. So
Mhm.
I want people to be able to not only figure out what is a fair division, but what does my future look like?
And getting divorced once was such fun. Perhaps I could figure out how not to ever do this again. Do you kind of help people in that way with some consulting of saying, okay, this is how this one worked. How is the rest of your life going to work?
Well, I don't know that the website does that. I always advise people, if you're going to go down this path again, you might want to consider a prenup, and we can plan for this, in the
Mhm.
future. But, it does help them look at how do they I try to tell people that divorce should not be viewed negatively. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to
Mhm.
create a new future. So the future that you thought you had isn't going to work out. And so now you have a new future, and you can sit and wallow in self-pity that didn't work out, or you can look at this as an opportunity to create a brand new future. And of course, when you're in a relationship, relationships are all about compromise, sacrifice. And as the relationship is falling apart, maybe there's a lot of compromises you really didn't want to make and sacrifices you didn't want to make. So now you have the opportunity to craft the future you want, with what you're interested in. And, where do you want to live? Where do you want to vacation? How do you want to plan your retirement? You can focus more on yourself. So it can be very positive.
At this moment, I'm in Estes Park, Colorado, because my darling wife really craves non-heat environment for vacations and mountains and so forth like that. I'm not a mountain man type. To me, it's just a box of rocks stacked neatly with roads. That's an example of a compromised kids, where if you like scuba diving and like being by the beach and you find yourself, how did this happen? I knew that my wife had some time off from singing. A 95-year-old singer substituted for her, and I'm not making that up, singing with the new Kings of Swing. But I thought I would take my wife on an airplane trip, go up here, enjoy the lack of heat, enjoy the air. Although up here, they have fires. So you cannot do a barbecue outdoors, and there'll be no 4th of July fireworks unless you're watching them on TV in another city. So, JJ, have you had any experience in your short, happy career with divorcing clients? that you can recall?
I do, yes, unfortunately, have seen that take place. And some of the things that Daryl described under the retirement accounts versus home versus kids, how they all factor in. I think one is still slowly working through, but somehow it's still been delayed, hadn't been finalized yet. One question I did wonder about, how do future earnings impact the splitting of the existing assets?
So it shouldn't affect the splitting of the
Okay.
assets at all. Future earnings will only go toward support.
Okay.
So, if there's going to be any child support or spousal support, then future earnings are taken into account, but not in terms of the assets
So in the
themselves.
state of Texas, do they have alimony?
We do. Texas looks at alimony very differently than a lot of other states. Texas has rehabilitative alimony,
Hmm.
whereas states like California and New York, they have more lifestyle alimony. And so rehabilitative alimony it's directed more at like this at the stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home parent
Mhm.
who has been out of the workforce for a long time and is going to need time to, get retraining, rebuild their career. And so it is much more limited in time and limited in amounts for spousal support. Whereas again, in other states, it's more lifestyle alimony.
Hmm.
So we
Yeah.
do have alimony. It's viewed very differently. And in the website, it'll do an automatic calculation, but
Huh.
it's right now I only have it calculating for Texas because it's brand new. As the website grows, people will enter in the state they're in and it'll calculate for that particular state.
As this website takes off, do you plan on continuing your practice full time, or do you plan on maybe becoming more of a consultant?
So, obviously I'm working and planning toward my own retirement. I right now continue to litigate and represent clients, mediate full time. If as the website grows and as it needs more of my attention, I may kind of phase into focusing more on that. But for now, the website just launched in April. It's still
Mhm.
brand new. And so I am still running my firm full time.
And since you were blessed with children just as I was, are any of your kids going to go into and help you with your practice later on?
No, they have two parents who are both attorneys, and they have said from an early age, I don't want anything to do with law. I have my boys are one is a an Army aviation Chinook
Mhm.
helicopter pilot, and the other is a personal trainer and Olympic weightlifter.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
nothing to do with law.
At least not yet.
Not yet. I'd be to take them in and teach them. Over the years, they have worked with me and they have
Mhm.
come to court with me and they've worked for summers, they've worked at the front desk. So they've seen it and they know it's difficult. People are emotional and sometimes they cry, sometimes they yell. It's a challenge.
It would be good to have an Olympic weightlifter or a helicopter pilot in the office with you to kind of calm things. We have learned in our profession that giving somebody what my mother used to call the look kind of was very instructive in terms of saying, if you want to keep talking like that, we can go outside and dance, but you will not enjoy the steps.
I have a very unique setup. I am actually outside of Austin, about 25 minutes outside of downtown Austin. And it's kind of a farm setup and
Hmm.
it's very relaxing. So when I do have people who are out here and they need a break, especially, a full day mediation and it's exhausting and it's emotional, I tell them, go outside and pet a goat I have miniature donkeys, dogs, cats, everybody running
That's
around.
brilliant.
Just take a walk, smell the flowers, breathe, and then come back. And
We
and
used
it's
to have a hawk's nest above our office, and the hawks would come in at 11:25 in the morning. And JJ, why don't you describe that scene and what we would tell clients?
Oh, yeah, we would warn them in advance not to be concerned when they saw it because it would be flying right at our window. And yet it would swoop up to its nest above us. It was a gorgeous sight every time we got to experience it and see them flying around the building as well. So it was a heads up.
There were no hawk bird marks on our windows, but every once in a while a lost pigeon would hit a window, but that's another story.
So, what would your parents describe what you do for a living?
I don't know how my parents would just say, she's a divorce lawyer. It's just easy enough. She's a divorce lawyer. People who know better would say she's a social worker because, really as a divorce attorney, it's not just law. I mean, I have people crying on my shoulder all day long. I am guiding them through and explaining. And, I am a child of divorce. My parents divorced when I
Mm.
was 14.
Oh,
And then when I got married, I was a second wife and a stepmom. and went through litigation with my then husband and his ex-wife. And then we had 2 kids together. And then when my boys were 10 and 12, we divorced. And so I have seen divorce from every angle you can see it.
Mhm.
And so I try to give all that to my clients. Like when they first come in and they're crying and they say, I never expected this to happen and I don't know what's going to happen with my life. I can say to them, I've been in that chair. I know what
Mhm.
that feels like and it's going to get better. Really, that is at the time of separation, that is the worst part because
Mhm.
that's where the fear is, the breakup is raw. The fear is at its height, and I'm going to help you through this. I'm going to talk you through it, and I'm going to tell you I know how it felt. And here's how I got through it. I actually have written a couple of books on how to heal from divorce and lots of this is probably how you're feeling. And here's some tools you can use to get through it, things you can focus on. And it's individual. I give lots and lots of examples because not everybody wants to do meditation. Not everybody likes exercise or cooking or gardening or, everybody has their thing, but you got to find your thing and
Mhm.
focus on you and healing and making sure that, especially if you have young kids, that you are available for them because they need you.
What will you miss most about practicing law should you ever up and retire from practicing law?
My kids say to me, I can't imagine you ever retiring. They just can't imagine that I could actually sit still and retire. So I don't really know. I will definitely enjoy my animals and I love flowers and gardening, travel. I've been traveling more and more. But talking to people about their lives, that's interesting to me. Listening to people's stories, telling people stories. That's what I do when I go to court is I tell their
Plus, you
story.
have a very engaging personality. So, whatever you decide to do and wherever you are, I'm sure even the goats listen more closely just to hear what you're saying to them.
Yeah, well, the dogs, they get to listen to me practice my opening and closing statements and
Oh, that's great. It's an interesting thing that you mentioned as far as the law obviously is the basis of all this, but the work you do is so much beyond that. It's the helping with the numbers, the emotional side. You're at your worst today. How do we help you build forward? And not necessarily the worst part in our case, but for our clients, it's that this is where I am. I'm not really sure where I can go next and how I'm going to get there. And can provide that perspective just like you do for your clients and to be able to talk them through the process. Because for us, it goes well beyond the numbers. Just like for you, it goes well beyond the letter of the law.
well, yeah, I send a lot of my clients to people like you because, especially when somebody who's never managed money, the stay at home mom
Mhm.
who's never managed money, all of a sudden is being given, part of an investment
Mhm.
account, part of a retirement account. And I too try to balance it, looking at
Mhm.
tax consequences for each.
Mhm.
Know what to do with it. Should I pay off my house? No. But let me send you to a financial planner,
One of
to a
our strong
CPA.
points has been truly after somebody else's client passes away, gets promoted, goes to heaven, and the poor lady who was left behind, in most cases, left behind, was totally ignored by the financial advisor, which makes beyond no sense to me because I've always told very strong personality guys, I know after I finish talking with you, you're going to turn to your darling wife and say, what do you think, honey? So I'm going to save you a lot of grief. And I'm just going to talk to your darling wife while you're both are here, because I know ultimately she's the decision maker, no matter how boisterous you are. And I've never had anybody give us a hard time on that. Do you recall any, Jed?
No, it's on the rare occasion that the man is the only one who makes any of the decisions, but that also means that's usually not someone we meet with. Because if both parties aren't at the table to be out to actually voice their desires, their concerns, and those things like that, it's very hard to help a family if it's a very one-sided conversation. So it's vitally important to have both parties involved in the
And the other
process.
problem that you run into on a constant basis, no kidding, is if one person is the decision maker and the other person is lost in space, the other person, contrary to what that person thinks that is the decision maker, kind of resents the bejesus out of being ignored. And that kind of festers up over time. And for
Yeah.
most financial advisors, unlike us, really prefer talking to other guys. And that's always been a mystery to me. Me personally, being of Italian extraction, from all parts of my family, I've always enjoyed talking to ladies a lot more than to me. There's no night out with the guys because I never did that when I was JJ's age at 46. So we offer perspective of a 78-year-old who still hops and bops and fascinates people by what we can do standing on one foot. And JJ at only 46 has three well-behaved, well-adjusted teenagers, two of which whom are daughters. They just got back from camp. So he has done a spectacular job coaching people on how to communicate with your children, not just your money.
I feel like part of my job is, and particularly with stay-at-home moms types, who to protect them from themselves. Because they'll
Mm,
come in and they'll say, my children are most important to me. I don't care about
mm,
any of the money. I just want to have, my time with my children. And I look at them and go, a year from now, you are going to care about the money. You're
mhm,
going to need the money, and you're going to see, oh, they're doing all the Disneyland stuff with dad, and you can't provide that for them. So I'm going to make sure you get your fair share too.
mhm.
I'll absolutely help protect you as the mom, but I'm going to make sure that you are taken care of going forward as well. And so, being that the coach, the the
Mhm.
counselor, the social worker, but making sure that they are focusing on all the pieces. I totally understand what their priorities are, but the money part, even if they've never managed it, is important for them to focus on too.
Do you recall any amazing compliments that your clients have given you over the years that you like to share?
I had a woman several years ago, and the timing of this phone call was so special because I was having a really bad day and really unhappy in my career choice and thinking, why am I doing this job? And I got this call completely out of the blue, maybe 8 or 10 years ago, and she said, "Oh, I finally found you." She said, "I live in South Carolina now. I You represented me back in 1995. You were court appointed to a criminal case, and CPS had taken my children and said I'm not going to get them back for 2 years. And you got me out of jail. You helped me get my children back in 6 months, and you divorced me from my husband who was in prison." And she said, "And now my children are grown and I have grandchildren and I have the life that I always dreamed of." And she said, "And I
Wow.
just wanted to thank you because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have that. And I just hope that you have the same." And it was such a special phone call and reminded me of why I do this work, even when it is really hard and emotional. It does mean a lot to people. It is the reason that I didn't want to do corporate banking anymore. I wanted to actually make a difference in somebody's life. And apparently I have. So
You definitely have. As we get towards the end of our time together, if you could talk to your 20-year-old self, what would you tell her?
plan, but be flexible
Oh,
because life will throw you curveballs you never expected. So plan for your future and have lots of specific plans, but also be very flexible and adapt to change because all great plans, they don't always follow through.
We always suggest that people travel sooner rather than later. And at 78, and my darling wife 74, I heard her just this morning say, maybe we don't want to take a trip in August because our house is just so deliciously comfortable. And I said, that's going to be more true every single year. So again, we, honest to God, need to follow our own advice, saying now is going to be a lot easier than later. Because later you can have more doctor's appointments in most cases than you do now.
thank you, Daryl Weinman, for being here today. And we'll definitely drop your information in the description of the x-hail.com to make sure that people have that resource available, as well as, of course, this show and future podcasts. This is the experts that we bring to the table to serve our clients.
Well, it was great to meet you both, and I look forward to working with you again in the future.